In 1993, a simple study in the journal Nature birthed the Mozart effect, a multi-million-dollar industry built on the promise that classical music could breed geniuses. But as we look back at the data in 2026, how much of it was science and how much of it was marketing? Today, we're peeling back the layers of music cognition. Does listening to music actually boost your IQ? Or does the real power lie in learning to play? And is the study playlist that you use helping you focus or just adding to the noise? I'm Mike Doherty, and today on Cracking the Shell, we're talking with Dr. Bob Slevc about how music really moves the mind.
Cracking the shell on the mic, psychological science in sight. Abby bringing that fire sparks when she speaks, ignition on sight. Been with the breakdown, mind state, takedown, never miss the details. Mic hitting concepts heavy like freight trains on steel rails. Joey steady mapping brainwaves, decoding how we feel. They turn that abstract real. Yeah, the knowledge is real. They peel it back slow, layer after layer. Mind so deep, yeah, we ride that elevator. Cracking the shell. Yeah, we dive into the mind. Abby, Ben, Mike, Joey, every time. Psychological science.
With me today is my friend and colleague, Dr. Bob Slevc. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
My first question here is the Mozart effect.
Yeah, I think it's like our most famous effect in their little field, and we're all very embarrassed about it.
Just to be frank, you'd be hard-pressed to find any parent anywhere who hasn't heard of the idea that listening to Mozart will make your kid a genius. So I guess the question is, does listening to Mozart make your kid a genius?
No.
All right, next topic.
Yeah, I mean, so, yeah, right. So the history here is that there's a study back in the early 90s, right, that, it's a psychology study. So they have people come in the lab and they're like, oh, hang on, we're just getting things ready for you. And then they put them in a waiting room and they either play a Mozart for 10 minutes or they play them like I forget what it was, but it was some kind of like calming self-help tape or something like that, or just lift them in silence. And then they had them come in and do some tasks. And the task that was most relevant here is a spatial cognition task. It's a kind of paper folding task where you show somebody a picture of paper folded a certain way, and then you say, well, what if you cut off this corner and you unfolded it? Like, which of these things would it look like? So it's kind of a visuospatial reasoning task.
And this is with adults, though, right?
This is with adults, like
Okay.
college students.
All right.
And it turned out the people who had waited listening to Mozart outperformed the other groups. So there you go. They got smarter.
Okay.
Problem, solved. We can just make everybody smarter. And in fact, that was sort of the take home. People published books about it. They released albums. The governor of Georgia passed a bill to basically fund CD or cassettes of Mozart being given to every newborn in the state.
Is it, or was this effect assumed to be specific to Mozart?
That's a good question. I think in the pop science it was. In the paper,
Okay.
not particularly. Yeah, poor Haydn is just like, what the hell? Yeah, and in fact, like later studies show that the effect is somewhat replicable, and you can get it with other kinds of music. You can actually get it with other kinds of things. Like basically, it should be a thing that you like. So spending 10 minutes listening to something you like is better than spending 10 minutes listening to something you don't like. In terms of some kinds of reasoning, and that seems to last for a few minutes.
Okay, so it's a legit finding then, no?
Yeah, it's not a super strong effect, but I think it replicates reasonably well.
All right, I didn't think that's where you're going to go with that one, but okay.
But so listening to Mozart for 10 minutes and doing something will make you maybe do a little better for a couple minutes.
Well, what's the explanation for this? Why does it happen?
Because you're in a better mood.
Oh, so it's just mood-dependent memory?
I think it's mood dependent. Well, I don't even think it's mood dependent memory. I think it's just mood dependent. Like you're in a good mood, and so you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I don't mind doing this
Are you
stupid
saying
paper
more
folding.
attentive, or...
Maybe you're more attentive. Maybe you're not just sitting there thinking, boy, those experimenters are so annoying. I can't believe they made me listen to that self-help tape in the waiting room.
Okay, so that's kind of a rumination type of
Maybe it's
explanation.
rumination. Yeah, I don't know for sure what the cause is, but it seems like there's something to it, right? And I don't think it's surprising to anyone to say that, hey, music has like pretty powerful effects on mood and arousal, right? Go to a concert, go to a club, and you'll be like, oh yeah, music has some effects on arousal, I think.
Okay, so would you agree, though, and feel free to tell me I'm full of BS, but...
Should I wait for you to finish?
You should probably wait for you to finish, but Mozart, listening to Mozart's not going to make you smarter per se.
It does not make you smarter at all.
All right, very cool. All right, how about we talk about the next thing on my list here?
Sure.
All right, another thing that is near and dear to my heart, in the sense that I don't believe it, but you often hear that musicians benefit from having studied music and played music their entire life, and this has sort of these wide-ranging effects on cognition. So the idea is that musical training leads to better cognition.
That idea is definitely out there. I will say, to be fair, I don't think it's conclusive. So people believe strongly both sides of this kind of debate. I think what is very clear is that, going through years of musical training makes you a better musician.
This is true. Okay, I can buy that.
There are very clear effects of expertise, right? You get very good at your instrument. You can get all sorts of interesting patterns. Like people can develop absolute pitch for an instrument they're very good at, even if they don't have absolute pitch in general. But does it make you smarter in other ways?
Okay, so I can buy this domain specificity, right? I can even buy this idea that maybe my memory or cognitive abilities for music specific stimuli is enhanced. Okay, that fits very well with like what we know about language training and other types of expertise.
Yeah, like the chess experts,
Like
right?
the chess experts, exactly.
Yeah. But I think, in the world where, to the extent that you believe in cognitive training and transfer, which I think
I don't, yeah.
you don't, right? I don't either anymore. But I think for people who do, music is appealing, right? Because you're like, well, here is something that might transfer. It's complicated. It has all these different dimensions. And people don't hate doing it, right? If you're doing some kind of cognitive task, cognitive training protocol where you got to do the NBAC task for 30 hours a day, like, that's a terrible life.
Well, first of all, 30 hours a day might be a little tough to achieve,
Maybe we'd get effects then.
Well, the one difference between, some of these old, I guess shouldn't call them old, but these cognitive training tasks and experiments and musical training is just the duration of training. So, if we're looking at music experts, you're typically looking at thousands of hours of training as opposed to 30 or 40 hours spread over 4 or 5 weeks, right? So it's at least somewhat plausible that it might.
Yeah, and I think another thing people will point to is like, hey, it's like sort of multimodal, like you're learning to like read music and you're playing things and this sort of like there's just a whole lot of different kind of aspects of it.
Right. Okay. So what does the data say though? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think there's decent evidence that musicians tend to outperform non-musicians on various kinds of cognitive tasks.
Okay, right. Okay, so if I just take that at face value, what you're advocating for is musical training leads to better cognition.
Well, here's the thing. So, like, for example, we know that musical training is associated with better auditory precision, so different kinds of auditory encoding tasks and stuff.
Okay.
On the other hand, if your auditory precision is bad and you try to take music lessons, you're probably going to find them hard and not very enjoyable, and you're probably not going to become a musician.
Okay, so you're thinking about this as, an alternative explanation anyway, as selection effects.
I think they might be pretty significant selection effects.
Okay, right. That makes a lot of sense.
And even things, to be honest, even some of those effects are maybe a little less robust than you might think. There's a recent large-scale mini-labs kind of paper that came out looking at...
Are you an author on that?
This is a different one.
Oh, okay.
Looking at, and I am not, no, but looking at, like, there's a finding that's been cited a lot that musicians have higher fidelity encoding of pitch in the brainstem. So you get this frequency following response in the brainstem that sort of tracks individual frequencies. Part of what's neat about this is that it's pretty veridical to the sound. So you can actually like synthesize the brainstem response and play it back, and it sounds like a sort of crappy version of what the sound was.
Oh, really? Okay.
But it turns out that may not replicate in large samples, and it is at least a less robust effect than you might have thought. So
such
maybe
is the story
musicians are not necessarily better at sound after all.
Such is the life of being a psychologist. Things don't replicate.
Yeah, it's a tough time to be a psychologist. But yeah, I think selection effects are a big thing, right? And it's hard to get around that. There have been a few experimental studies, but just exactly as you were saying before, the advantage of music you might think is you can look at these people with years and years of training. But of course, the experimental studies are not that.
Right, and it's really hard to randomly assign people to be lifelong musicians.
Yeah.
That just does not seem like a longitudinal study that's feasible to do.
Yeah, the attrition rates are a little tough to explain in your annual reports.
That's true, unless you can get some funding from Fender, for example.
Well, I will say, I had a grant quite a while ago from the Grammy Foundation, so...
This is true. This is true.
I guess you could say I won a Grammy.
It's probably more selective than the actual award. What's the main takeaway from this? If I'm a listener and I want to know, should I study music because it's going to stave off Alzheimer's or dementia?
No, I think you should study music because music is great, and it is really cool to be able to play music, and it will make you a better and well-rounded person. And so if you like music enough to want to study it, you should 100% do it. But if you want to be better at math or you want to stave off dementia, you should exercise and study math and I don't know. If you want to get better at something, then you will get there faster by practicing that thing.
All right. Well, I'll just add this, that it's hard not to buy into this idea that a rich intellectual life that's full of stimulation is beneficial for the mind. It's just hard to argue against that. And if music is a piece of that, that's great. If music's not, there's probably many other ways one can have that rich intellectual life. And if nothing else, you get to live a rich intellectual life with lots of stimulation.
I think that's right. And the other thing I would point out is that a lot of work in this field says, we're going to contrast musicians and non-musicians. But like, what is a non-musician?
Yeah, good point.
That's a really tricky thing. I mean, we're surrounded by music all of the time. You pick anybody off the street, they know a ton of things about music. Many years ago, this guy, Dan Levitin, wandered around his campus and asked people to sing popular songs at the time. Like he'd say, sing me the intro to The Simpsons. And not only could everybody do it, but they actually all hit the right pitch. These are not people with absolute pitch. Many of them had no musical training at all, right? Music is ubiquitous in our lives. We know a lot about it. I think
but that's not...
It's like if I wanted to study language, I don't need to study novelists, right? Like I can study all sorts of people.
Yeah, this is true. Okay, how about we move on to the next question I have, right? Which is an age-old question. about the value of listening to music while you're studying for an exam.
Yeah. This all came out of, I forget exactly when, but I'm going to say like the 40s or something. I hope that's not
Really?
way off.
It goes back that far?
Well, not for studying for exams, but people started to realize that you could play music in factories and it could increase productivity.
Okay.
And so this idea of like background music having beneficial effects has been around for a long time, and it really comes from the kind of industrial component, right? So if you're sitting there, screwing a panel on the side of a Chevy every time one comes down the thing, it turns out that having some music can sort of improve your performance. And people have sort of, played around with this for a long time. People look at music and its effect on like, consumer behavior, like what music they play in shops and stuff like that has measurable effects on what kinds of purchasing decisions people make. And
Or how
like
much
that.
soup that I eat?
How much soup that you eat, probably.
Yeah, okay.
But does it help with studying? Well, I think it's complicated. Probably not at one level, because doing more than one thing is harder than doing one thing.
True.
Right? And music is complicated. And if you buy that music is related to like language and might engage some of the same kinds of neural processes and stuff like that, then you might get interference so that as you're listening to music, you're processing language maybe a little less well. We don't know for sure, but I think that's plausible. There's evidence that would support that.
Yep. I would think that if you're paying attention to the music and you're paying attention to what you're trying to study, that it's a classic dual task, right? Divided attention.
Yeah. If you ask undergrads, which I do often about these kind of things, a lot of times people will tell you, well, you don't want to listen to music with lyrics because it's like too distracting, right?
Yeah.
But you can listen to music without lyrics, and not so bad, right? But people will also tell you, well, you can't listen to complicated music, or they'll say you can't, people have strong ideas about this. The other thing music does, right, is we were talking about emotional effects and attentional effects, right?
Okay,
And music is engaging, and it can sort of increase your kind of cognitive arousal. So if you're about to fall asleep, maybe listening to music might mean you will stay awake and pay a little more attention to what you're studying. So even if it's distracting you, it might be, relatively beneficial.
Yeah, if you want to fall asleep, turn on a podcast like this one, for example.
Good night, everybody. Yeah, I mean, one of my grad students, Mina, is doing some, in the neuroscience and cognitive science program, is doing some work related to this, where she's looking at how background music compares to other kinds of background sounds.
Okay, that sounds like a good control condition instead of nothing, right?
Yeah, I mean, the control, it turns out to be tricky. So at one point we had, one control is background noise like they'd use in hearing and speech, like background babble, where it sounds like you're in a sort of speaky environment.
Right.
But acoustically, that's really different. So the actual sort of auditory masking properties might differ. So we thought, well, what if we do reverse music, right? Reverse music has all the same properties, right? It just sounds weird. But in fact, it has maybe too many of the same properties, because in fact, it still kind of has the same rhythm, and it has the same sort of pitch relationships and stuff.
Why not something like brown noise, pink noise, white noise?
Again, the acoustic properties are different. So music varies a lot, where sometimes it's relatively loud and sometimes it's relatively quiet and stuff like that. It's quiet in different loud and quiet in different frequency bands. So what she did, which I think is awesome, is she took a really beautiful Nina Simone song, and then she developed a MATLAB script that completely ruins it by reassigning all the pitches randomly and like jittering them all in time.
Oh, interesting.
So you take this like lovely song and you make it completely terrible, but it is acoustically has all the same stuff in it.
Genius.
Yeah.
That was a good idea.
I know. Who knew you would go to grad school and learn to ruin music?
Only a psychologist.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right. So, I mean, and this is all still kind of stuff that's a little bit in press, but in preparation, in progress, in something.
All right, so the hypothesis is what?
So the hypothesis is that some of the effects of music that are either mood related or are about these sort of like expectancy reward kind of processes.
Okay,
so one of the things that people say makes music rewarding is that, you that feeling when you the end's about to come and it doesn't quite come, or a key
That's right,
change
you try to finish
happens.
someone's sentence, yeah.
Yeah, so in music, that seems to be something that leads to a lot of reward, and people have linked this to these sort of dopaminergic like reward systems that have to do with learning and prediction and expectation.
Right, okay, yeah.
Well, those also have to do with learning, right? And so there's a story that maybe engaging that sort of dopaminergic learning related system is going to actually sort of offset some of the distracting effects, so that music, might still be worse than silence in some ways, but it might be better than other kinds of sounds because it has this sort of reward component associated with it.
Can I throw out one more thing?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it matter what you're trying to mask in the background? I mean, I'm just thinking about real world classroom studying, or, preparing for an exam. You have roommates in the room next door, and the purpose of the music may not be so much to provide background music for studying, but rather to mask what's going on elsewhere in the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Studying is an imperfect situation, right? We're always trying to learn stuff in weird, complicated situations. So trying to manage that, I think, is important. And really, like, a lot of this has to do with, your own level of arousal, your own distractibility. If you're really sleepy, it might be more important. If you're like really like amped up, it might actually be a little too arousing and make you a little spazzy.
All right. Well, what would you recommend if a student comes to you and says, hey, I tend to study with music playing in the background. Is this a good idea? What would you recommend I do?
I think I'd say, how are your grades? Well, no, I mean, like, if it works for you, I think it's great. Like,
Yeah,
I think people, in general, people may have, one hopes they have sort of self-selected the right level of, the right kind of music, the right level of music.
All right. So if they can self-monitor, so if they can engage in some sort of cognitive monitoring of how well their performance is, that would make sense.
That's the hope.
Well, Bob, I think that about does it for my questions. Thank you for coming on today, and I hope we can have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was lovely. Cheers.
On.
All right.
Abby, Ben, Mike, Joey, let's go. Yeah. Cracking the shell on the mic, psychological science in sight. Abby bringing that fire, sparks when she speaks, ignition on sight. Been with the breakdown, mind state, takedown, never miss the details. Mike hitting concepts heavy like freight trains on steel rails. Joey steady mapping brainwaves, decoding how we feel. They turn that abstract real. Yeah, the knowledge is real. They peel it back slow, layer after layer. Mind so deep, yeah, we ride that elevator. Cracking the shell. Yeah, we dive into the mind. Abby, Ben, Mike, Joey, every time. Psychological science with the rhythm and the rhymes.
This podcast is a joint effort of Abby Nicholas, Ben Jones, Joey Barnett, and myself, Mike Doherty. A huge thanks to Bob Slevc for helping us decode the rhythms of the brain, and to Suno AI for creating the music. If you want to learn more about Bob's work, you can find his latest research at the University of Maryland's Music and Cognition Lab. You can check it out online. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends, or send us an email at crackingtheshellonpsychology@gmail.com. That's crackingtheshellonpsychology, one big long word, @gmail.com. Until next time, keep jamming to your favorite tunes and enjoy everything that music has to offer.